I want to try to think about this question. We did a few sessions before, but I want to focus on a single point here. Why is the focus on the atheism question? Atheism question misguided. Just want to clarify my thoughts on it. So if you are interested, you can follow me here. And what I mean is, not for an individual person or a philosopher or a philosopher or a theologian. What I mean is for contemporary Islamic thought, especially the Islamic thought which is focused on current issues and current civilizational issues, and on the dominant modernist civilization. I'm interested in that thought because I'm part of that school of thought, or the current, or the movement. So why is it misguided? So I want to think about that question from an Islamic perspective, obviously. I can start with something, trivial. Like, despite everything, atheism is a minority, etc. But we are not concerned with minority or majority as such, as Muslims. Our concern is with truth, the truth, because that's one of God's name, the truth, in Quran, al-Haq. So we believe in this al-Haq in its totality. So our concern is truth, not any pragmatism as such. And pragmatism or anything related to it must be seen under this large umbrella of sticking with the truth. So I'm not going to focus on that point. My points are mainly the first two, maybe three. Let's see. The first point is the focus of Islam. In the Quran is not the existence of God as such. That's the reality, which is undeniable. The focus is on the conception of God. And focus on, so that's the first bit, focus on atheism. Shift our focus away from the conception of God to the mere is important, everybody, to the mere existence of God. Becomes a theoretical debate on the intellectual level anyway, but essentially diverts the focus away from what the focus of Islam and the Quran is and should always be, because as a matter of fact, it doesn't really matter. A, claim that God doesn't exist, so he has no conception of God. B, have a conception of God which is false. Am I going to side with B just because he believes that God exists, and somehow think that this atheist is the evil and this guy is less evil, or not evil but just misguided? No. From the strategy point of view or pragmatic viewpoint, maybe I might focus on B because he already believes in God, so I try to focus on that because it might be easy to convert him to the right conception. But that's not always true, and that's a question of strategy, and I think that's not the main debate. So this is one first pitfall, is when you focus on the atheist debate, you turn away from the focus on conception of God and correcting your view of the nature of God and your relationship with God, and you focus merely on whether God exists or not. That's one of the main things. And when we talk about focusing on conception of God, we talk about both in the positive as well as the negative sense. conception of God. That's what we call it, aqidah here. I'm correcting your aqidah, tasir al-aqaid. Conception of God. It has two horns to it, a positive horn and negative horn. In fact, we start from negative horn, la ilaha illallah. So in la ilaha illallah, you reject false conceptions of God. That's what you are rejecting mainly, la ilaha. And then you posit the correct conception of God, illallah. And when you say Muhammad Rasulullah, you assert the fact that that's the gate through which you will, that's the place from where you will get the correct conception of God. So there are three things there: negation of the wrong conception of God, conceptions that include pagans and Ahlul Kitab and everybody, and then positing the correct conception of God, proclaiming the correct conception of God. And then the third is saying Muhammad is where you will find the correct conception of God, Muhammad and Abduhu Rasul, because he is the messenger of God. God has himself revealed it to him how he is and how he should be proclaimed, and what are the wrong conceptions and all that. So when you focus on the mere existence of God and stealthily, knowingly or unknowingly, align yourself with those people who claim that God exists without worrying about their conception of God. Even if you want to, if you will focus on the question of existence, you will ignore the main question, for sure. If the question of existence was so important, God would have. Now I'll come to why existence of God is a secondary question. That's because everybody, even atheists, has a conception of God. We'll get to that. And when we ignore the issue of conception of God, or don't focus on it, and focus on the existence of God, we can easily forget that from Islamic perspective, God can be, to accept something as God doesn't need to necessarily accept something as a creator or transcendental or metaphysical entity. Of course, that is also a part of it, but it is part of the comprehensive conception of God is that even if you accept sovereignty of something from Islamic conception, you are making them into God, even in normal or ilah. Even though in normal parlance you don't think that entity or physical entity or spiritual entity or psychological entity is actually God. But from Islamic perspective, if you are accepting the sovereignty of something, not just theoretically, mind you, but also practically. So you might actually make something into your God, practically speaking, even though theoretically you don't believe that that thing is your God, but you are behaving as if it is your God. And that's part of not believing in false God, and it's part of not giving the true God its due. And that's why Al-Quran Al-Karim, the glorious Quran, talk about people who have taken their desires, made their desires their God. So even an atheist might have a God in this sense. As Quran says that, haven't you seen a person who has made his or her desires into his or her God, ilah? Because he has accepted at least practical sovereignty of desires. What about a civilization which had actually justified not just practical but theoretical sovereignty of desires in liberalism and capitalism and socialism? You can't develop this critique of the civilization at this level if you are obsessed with the conception of the existence of God. Those are very superficial questions in a sense, in compared to what we are talking about. Let's see what the Quran says. Quran says that, I think Surah Al-Jasiyah, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ وَخَتَمَ على سمعه وقلبه وجعل على بصره غشاوة فمن يهديه من بعد الله أفلا تذكرون. Did you ever consider the case of a person who has taken his desire as his God, and then Allah caused him to go astray despite knowledge, because desire has become a veil through which knowledge has been, become ineffective, and sealed his hearing and his heart, and cast a veil over his sight. This desire seals your hearing and your heart, and casts a veil over your sight. And who after Allah can direct him to the right way? Will you not take heed? So this is the person who has taken his own desire as his God, ilah. And that can be a Muslim, that can be an atheist, that can be a person who believes in God, that can be a person who doesn't believe in God in the normal sense of the word. But in Islamic conception, he has made his desire into his God, because he's accepted at least the practical sovereignty of his desire. And if you make something into your sovereign practically or theoretically or both, you're considering them as your God according to Islamic conception at a certain level. And it's clear from tafsir. If you look at the tafsirs, they make it clear. أَفَرَأَيْتَ أَيُّهَا الرَّسُولُ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ هَوَاهُ إِلَهًا لَهُ فَلَا يَهْوِي شَيْئًا إِلَّا فَعَلَهُ. So whatever he or she desires, it does it without considering anything else. And Sadi says that يَقُولُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى فَرَأَيْتَ, have you seen this misguided person? اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, he has taken his own desires as his God, his ilah. فَمَا هَوِيَهُ سَلَكَهُ سِوَا كَانَ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ أَوْ يَسْخَطُهُ. So whatever comes to his desires, whatever he desires, he just try to fulfill it without thinking whether it will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or it will anger him. So this is clear. And all tafsirs, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, al-Hasan al-Qatada, they say that this is the kafir. اتَّخَذَ دِينَهُ مَا يَهْوَاهُ. He has taken his religion to be whatever his desires are, and whatever he desires, he is ready to fulfill them, and doesn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his sovereign Lord, and doesn't fear him, doesn't make haram what Allah has made haram. وَقَالَ آخَرٌ مَعْنَهُ اتَّخَذَ مَعْبُودَهُ هَوَاهُ فَيَعْبُدُ مَا تَهْوَاهُ نَفْسُهُ. Other Mufassirun said that its meaning is that he has made his own desire into his God, and he worship his desire, worship his self, because worshipping yourself is basically worshipping, going after your desires and making it into your sovereign Lord is basically worshipping yourself. So what I want to say is, here Quran clearly considers somebody who take his or her desires as their sovereign, theoretically or practically, as someone who is taking those desires as their God. So that's part of the conception of Islam conception of God, that the sovereignty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in that sense, and desires and everything else should be theoretically as well as practically subservient to this sovereignty. And if somebody doesn't accept this sovereignty theoretically or practically, according to Islamic conception, they have made these desires into their God, even if they are atheists. And this is the point. If you focus on mere existence of God, you will miss the big picture, the actual Islamic conception of God, and making it the focus of your thinking as well as your life. And you won't be able to focus on the correction of your conceptions. You will just be focused on the trivial question, a relatively trivial question of the existence. I'll finish with two examples of how this misguided focus on the question of existence and atheism can blind you, can make you ignore the fundamental question, and actually can make you oblivion to the real dangers. So here's the example. First one is theoretical, but it has historically huge impact. So if you focus on, for example, philosophy, So there are philosophers, so you'll say Marx doesn't believe in God. Nietzsche doesn't believe in God. Feuerbach maybe. Sartre maybe. Okay, they're atheist philosophers, so you stay away from them. But in modern civilization, the misconception about, or the wrong conception of God, conceptions of God, on which modern civilization is based, weren't propagated mainly by these philosophers. They came when the real work was already done. The actual work of deviation, which is modernity, was done by people who didn't deny God. Kant, for example. In fact, he wrote a long defense of Christianity, Hegel. He doesn't deny God. Locke, Protestant Christian. These are the people who defended liberalism, capitalism, and the basic deviation on which modernity is based. So you ignore these people, and you think that Marx and Nietzsche and Sartre are the real enemies, and these people are your friends because they believe in God. A lot of Christians thought that, and a lot of Muslims, superficial Muslim intellectuals also think that. And that results in a ignorance of the real false God-like desires like capital, which are ruling today's world, and focus on trivial issue of the existence of abstract entities. And the modern and from this the wrong conception that modernity has somehow anti-God or anti-religion. No, the mainstream of modernity is neither anti-God nor anti-religion. It is anti-God and anti-certain conceptions of God and anti-certain conception of religion. And modernity can be defended on, and most effective defense of modernity has been the one which don't deny God or religion, but they come up with conceptions of God which are useful for modernity. So that's a misconception as well. What they deny is that God has a civilizational power, or religion has a civilizational power. As long as it's a personal pursuit or communal pursuit which is subservient to the sovereignty of the state or capital, then those religions are very good for modernity and capitalism and all that. As the history of Protestantism and Islamic banking and Islamic economics show. And the last point is that from a geopolitical perspective, a lot of Muslim countries justified their enmity toward the Soviet Union based that they are a godless country. They deny God. And that's why, and they justified their alliance with America on the basis that America doesn't reject God, it's a Christian country. But that's like total misunderstanding of what America is and what capitalism is and what modernity is. Because the real God in America is the capital. And real God, the American imperialism, the real God is America itself. What they worship is America itself. And American people mostly worship themselves. That's their God. As it's clear from even the insightful proponents of American imperialism know that. For example, if you look at what is achieving our country, it said that we are the greatest country in the world, and America, we in America we should worship ourselves and nothing else. Or even if you look at Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, where he said that America is the greatest poem in the history. Anyway, so you align yourself with America based that they are Christian people that believe in God, and fool yourself into just justifying the hegemony of capitalism, which is the greatest rebellions against the Christian and Islamic civilization which history has seen, and which has led to Islamic countries becoming subservient to this rebellion as well, and our ability to transcend capitalism and challenge it has become weaker and weaker because we have been misdirected toward the issues of existence of God rather than conception of God. I think that's the same logic there. So for these reasons, I think that this focus on atheism is misguided and very dangerous, practically speaking.